Okay, in this section I'm going to show you how to solve polynomial equations by factoring. And what you have to use here is there's a property here called the zero product property right here. And basically what it says is it states right here, if you can see this, it states the zero product property states that if A times B equals 0, then either A is 0 or B is 0. So, for example, if you had a product of two factors like x minus 5 times x plus 3, and you had it set equal to 0, now this is an equation here. Now don't get it confused with what we were doing earlier. Earlier we were just giving you polynomials and you were writing them in factored form. Here we have an equation. And so to solve this equation, what you would do is you would set each factor equal to 0, and then you would solve that equation. So here I would set x minus 5 equal to 0, I would set x plus 3 equal to 0, and I would solve each equation. So if I solved x minus 5, I would get x equal 5. If I solved x plus 3 equals 0, I'd get x equal negative 3. So I'm going to start you out on 3 problems that are already factored for you, and then we'll do some where you have to actually factor. So here I have the product of 3x minus 1 times x plus 5. Alright, now there I've got that product equal to 0. So what I have to do is I have to set each factor equal to 0. So I set 3x minus 1 equal to 0. I set x plus 5 equal to 0. And then I solve these. Now I'm going to assume that at this point you can solve these without going to a lot of trouble. Here you just add 1 to both sides, you get 3x equal 1, then divide by 3 and get x equals 1/3. And on this one, to solve the second one, you just subtract 5 from both sides and get x equals negative 5. Okay, here's another one. The two factors are 3x and 2x minus 3. And since their product is equal to 0, then I know either 3x must equal 0 or 2x minus 3 must equal 0. Now, if you divide both sides by 3 here, you'll get x equals 0. And if you add 3 to both sides here, you'll get 2x equal 3, then divide by 2, you'll get x equal 3/2. So notice these have two answers. There's two results for these. Now this one, it has two factors, but notice the factors are the same, x minus 7 times x minus 7. So in that case, you don't have to set both factors equal to 0, just set one equal to 0. So set x minus 7 equal to 0, and then solve that, and you get x equals 7. Now, the idea here, though, is when you have a polynomial like x squared minus 36 equal to 0, if you can factor this polynomial and write this as the product of two factors equal to 0, you can use the techniques up here to solve the equation. So let's factor this. Now this factors as difference of squares. So if you need to, review the factoring sections before. But this will factor into x plus 6, x minus 6. So I have x plus 6 times x minus 6 equal to 0. So that means either x plus 6 must be 0 or x minus 6 equals 0. And so if I solve this one, if I subtract 6 from both sides, I get x equal negative 6. And on this one, I can just add 6 to both sides, and I get x equal positive 6. Now actually, you could write that as x equal plus or minus 6 if you wanted to. Okay. The next one is 3p squared minus 16p plus 5. And we saw earlier in this example, I think we did this one earlier, where we saw that it factored into 3p minus 1 and p minus 5. And then, since that product has to equal 0, then either 3p minus 1 must be 0 or p minus 5 is 0. So to solve 3p minus 1 equals 0, add 1 to both sides and you get 3p equals 1. Then divide both sides by 3 and you get p equals 1/3. And then for this one, just add 5 to both sides and you get p equal 5. Now this one, 9y squared minus 12y plus 4 equals 0, that actually factors as a perfect square trinomial. that's actually 3y minus 2 times 3y minus 2. And again, like I did up here, when it shows up twice like that, you don't have to solve both equations because they're going to have the same answer. So just solve 3y minus 2 equal to 0, and then if you add 2 to both sides, then divide by 3, you get y equals 2/3. Okay, so here's a couple more. Now on this one, sometimes problems like this one here can confuse people, but notice here, remember the first thing you're always supposed to do when you factor is to factor out the greatest common factor. So 15x squared and 20x have a greatest common factor of 5x. So if I factor 5x out of 15x squared, I get 3x, and factoring 5x out of minus 20x gets me minus 4. So I get 5x times the binomial 3x minus 4. So now I set those two factors equal to 0, 5x equals 0, and 3x minus 4 equals 0. And then of course here, if you divide both sides by 5, then x must be 0. And then here, if you add 4 to both sides, then divide by 3, x equals 4/3. Okay, now this one, you might recognize this from when we did factor by grouping. Notice that I gave you this. Notice you have an x minus 5 factor here and an x minus 5 factor here. So I can factor the x minus 5 out of these two terms, and when I factor the x minus 5 out, I'm left with 4 minus x squared. But the 4 minus x squared actually will factor 2, and it factors using difference of squares into 2 plus x, 2 minus x. So I have three factors this time, x minus 5, 2 plus x, and 2 minus x. So set each one equal to 0, because this whole product is equal to 0, so I can use the zero product property. So x minus 5 equals 0, and if I solve that, I get x equals 5. And then 2 plus x equals 0, and if I solve that, I get x equals negative 2. And then 2 minus x equals 0, and if you solve that, you get x equals positive 2. All right, let's do one more here. Here I've got x cubed equals 2x squared. Now what I want to do here is move this 2x squared to the left side. And so when I move it over there, it becomes a minus 2x squared. Well, then I can factor the x squared out. That's a common factor. So I get factor x squared out of this, and I get x. Factor x squared out of minus 2x squared, and I get minus 2. So this factors into x squared and x minus 2 equals 0. So the only number squared that gives 0 would be x equals 0. And then to solve x minus 2 equals 0, just solve that by adding 2 to both sides, and you get x equals 2. Okay, so the next video I'm going to do is going to be some word problems that you can set up an equation for and then solve for the answer involving polynomials.